Biden. He rally, he mentioned President Joe Biden a number of times, criticizing him and his policies on everything from immigration to inflation. One name that was noticeably absent from his speech last night was Senator Raphael Warnock, the candidate he is likely going to be facing once we get through election night. So he was voting about an hour ago, and I had a chance to ask him a few questions, and one of them I wanted to ask him about was why the focus on Biden and not Warnock. Listen to what he told me. You mentioned President Biden quite a few times, but you didn't mention Senator Warnock by name. Do you think you're running against Biden, or are you running against Senator
Warnock? Oh, I'm running against Warnock because he voted with Biden. Everyone knows that.
Do you see a difference between the two of them?
No, I don't. I'm calling little Biden because all the votes is just like he's voting for Biden. And that's what's so sad. And everyone sees that. No, I don't want to mention it. Well, I'm not afraid of mentioning it.
National Republicans have already started to try and tie Senator Ross with President Biden. Biden has an declining in this state and has been for I get the sense that Republicans here that Senator Warnock is generally well as a person in this state. We even saw a recent ad of the National Republican senatorial where they started off basically saying we know he's inspiring, but his policies. It seems like we're seeing Herschel Walker take an approach.
Congressman Mo Brooks, who we actually just spoke with just a few moments ago here, and the reason why Mo Brooks is turning head here is because he lost Donald Trump's endorsement when he plummeted in polling. Well, look where he's at now. He's got a really good shot to be in the runoff here to most likely take on Katie Britt. I want to let you hear his response to me when I asked him about Donald Trump's influence today. Has Donald Trump's influence waned in the Republican Party?
No, I don't think so. Not at all. But no one has 100% influence. There are varying degrees of influence in different parts of the country. In the state of Alabama, by way of example, in Senate races, he's have not done well. 1 out of 3 times they have done well. We tend to be a pretty independent group in the state of Alabama.
And this is a situation here where we're likely expecting to head to a runoff. And I also, though, want to note here, when we're talking about the changing landscape of Republican senators in the U.S. Congress, Richard Shelby was one of those Republican senators who did not object to the 2020 election results. As of last night, Katie Britt tells me that she would have done just that. So that means, most likely, unless there's a crazy Democratic upset, that the next U.S. senator from Alabama is going to be a Trump ally and questioning of whether they would ultimately certify those 2024 results.
And Vaughn, we got a bit of late breaking news last night. Mike Durant has already said it almost, I don't want to say he's conceding anything, but he said if he doesn't get into the runoff, he would endorse Brooks, which I think tells you sort of how things have broken in this primary. Is that right?
Right. There's millions of dollars that have been spent to take down Mo Brooks and then Mike Durant. And that is why you have seen Durant's numbers plummet. All these campaigns are telling me here. You know, there's the McConnell and Shelby aligned forces that are trying to prop up Katie Britt here, and that is what grew the ire of Mike Durant and led him to tell us last night that he would back Mo Brooks if this runoff is between Britt and Brooks. Now, to note, I asked Brooks that exact question here just in the last hour, and he told me that he believes it could be a Durant-Brooks runoff, and Britt could miss the whole runoff herself, and so he would not endorse Durant because he wouldn't want to find himself in that situation in the next 4 weeks.
So did not reciprocate just yet. Very fascinating. We didn't even get to the governor's race, which is equally as fascinating, but for different reasons, and we'll get to that later.
We'll be here tomorrow.
Exactly. There's a reason you're there today. So, Vaughn, thank you. Now let's go to South Texas. That's where we find our senior congressional correspondent, Garrett Haake. And Garrett, this is probably the biggest Democratic race tonight, though I might argue the runoff for Attorney General in your home state of Texas, both of the Republican side and the Democratic side could be fascinating down the road. But while you're there, is this House race. What are you learning? We're trying to find out, can a pro-life Democrat still survive in Democratic primary elections?
Yeah, Chuck, look, this race has a little bit of something for everybody. It's got this idea of an abortion question, which has really energized Jessica Cisneros, the challenger's followers. It has energized her fundraising in the last couple of weeks. But just for being down here the last day, I don't get the sense on the ground here in Laredo that it is the issue going into the polling booth that is on the minds of voters. And it wasn't exactly the runaway issue when I asked Jessica Cisneros about how she sees this race shaping up tonight. Listen to what she told me when I talked about the issue set that's going to decide this race.
I think the issues are the same. You know, we've been running on healthcare that includes abortion care. We've been running on good paying jobs here in the district, investment in infrastructure here. But I do think that the sense of urgency has escalated in many ways. And I do think that, you know, like for example, choice, like is something that in the last few weeks, the urgency has just been escalated so much. When we're talking out there to voters, they want to know, what are you going to do to make sure that I have a good paying job to be able to provide for my family? That's the number one concern. And two, you know, how are you going to make sure that I'm healthy enough to be able to provide for my family?
Chuck, healthcare. We've heard it from the mouths of every Democratic candidate going back, you know, really prior to the 2018 midterms. It has been the key issue in so many of these races. But down here, we also have the specter of this looming FBI investigation that Cuellar was involved in. He says, his attorney says, he's not a target of it, but the FBI has not said that, and they raided his home and his office. That has come up with voters that I've talked to, and also just the question of how long might be too long for a member of Congress. Cuellar has been here for more than 15 years. He is really associated with Laredo. He is an institution. That works well for him in some cases. I've heard voters say they like that this is a guy who's on the Appropriations Committee. He's sending home money. He gets the district. But also, perhaps, time for a change. You know, Cisneros is out today. She's not endorsed. She was at this polling place. She has been basically everywhere. Henry Cuellar, no public events today. His campaign's not holding an event tonight. I don't know how to read into that exactly, but I think it's noteworthy that we're not seeing him out here trying to really kind of close this thing out on the race's last day.
Garrett, very quickly, just in your experience in Texas, runoff turnouts. We know they're lower than primary turnouts. How much lower?
Substantially lower, Chuck, and it's even more challenging now because you've got a new district here. The redistricting plays into this as well. There's a significant additional amount of Bexar County, that's the San Antonio suburbs of the San Antonio city proper. They will be seeing both of these names on their ballot for the first time. The 28th district hasn't had a runoff in modern memory. Just educating voters to know that they're not done with this primary is a challenge for both of these candidates.
Yeah, that's why you would assume those with the deepest support, not necessarily the broadest, might have the advantage today in all these runoffs in Texas. Garrett Haake on the ground for us from Laredo. Garrett, thank you. Let me bring in Mark Caputo. Mark, let's go a little big picture here. You spend a lot of time covering the sort of where the Republican Party's relationship is with Donald Trump on a given day. This is going to be, we already know this is at best a mixed bag set of results tonight for the former president. And at worst, a really sort of punch in the gut. I mean, he could have one guy he did endorse lose badly, the Secretary of State lose that race, and then a guy he once endorsed and then unendorsed gets into a runoff essentially without his help. Are the Trump folks braced for this bad night?
Oh yeah, sure. They're not going to describe it as a bad night. As you know, with Donald Trump, when he loses, he said he won, and when he wins, he said he won. So in this case, Purdue, who is more than likely going to lose to Governor Kemp, is going to lose big, and you're not going to really hear Trump talk about that much. You might reference it. Tonight's going to be a Herschel